All right. Folks in the back, can you hear me okay? All right, good deal. All right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for logging in for those joining us online today. If you are here for Disasters and Dragons, unexpected intersections between tabletop role-playing and Homeland Security exercises, that will be next week. Today is my general preparedness mindset talk/discussion. A couple of warnings before I start off. First off, I am creatively lazy. I will be crowdsourcing a large portion of this presentation. We'll be asking those of you with handwriting better than my own, which is probably everyone, to assist me in scribing on the board as we work through some facilitated discussions here over the next hour. Also, I've been in the Emergency Operations Center since March 5th of last year, pretty much continually. At this point, my filters are pretty much shot. So I don't think anyone here is going to learn any new words, but the occasional interesting interjection may slip out. My name is Clayton Oliver. I am ISU's Emergency Manager. This is my second career, as I was telling the folks in the room just before we went live. My first career was technical writing in the software industry. I did that for 12 years, and I got tired of writing documentation that no one read for software that no one installed. So I decided to go to a more frustrating career. Went back to school for emergency management. Spent 4 years working for Lexington, Kentucky's Emergency Management Division as a chemical weapons hazard planner. Worked for the University of Kentucky Police Department for a couple of years doing EM for them, and then came out here last April 1st. Was originally ISU's Deputy Emergency Manager. My boss retired on February 14th of last year. I inherited her position. And on February 28th, we were evacuating 140 students from Italy. So it's been pretty much nonstop shenanigans since then. I can talk more about myself, but nobody wants to hear that. So let's go ahead and go over what I'm going to do today. This is the only wall of text slide I'm going to inflict on you all today. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. Lots of bullet points, lots of text. I find that it distracts my audience. So instead, this is going to be a lot of 10 to 15-year-old memes that you have all already seen. But first off, for those of you who are joining us who may know, I am also Emergency on the ISU subreddit. That is me. That account is not curated by committee. So that is me attempting to be as professional as I can be while still being honest with you all and giving you a decent look at what's going on inside my unit. So what we're going to talk about today is where all emergency preparedness begins on the personal level, which is mindset and motivation. From there, we'll roll into awareness, knowing what's going on in your surroundings so you can react to them accordingly. We'll talk a little bit about threats and hazards, both in our personal lives and what we may be looking at happening either on campus or within the Ames and Story County community. And then we'll talk about the tools that we use to deal with those, plans and procedures, skill sets, gear and stuff. And then we'll have one very boring slide on financial and legal preps, and then I'll open it up for questions. Couple of other cautions about my presenting style. I am terrified of public speaking. So I tend to go as quickly as possible so I can escape my audience as quickly as possible. So if at any point I'm going too fast or it looks like I'm edging toward the door, Drew and Bernie are authorized to stop me at the door. The rest of you, if I'm going too fast, throw up a hand, ask me to slow down. For those on the other end of the WebEx especially, I also tend to pace a lot when I'm presenting. This may take me farther away from the mic. So if you can't hear me, let us know in the chat. Kat will use her shepherd's crook and yank me back on the stage in front of the mic. Good deal? All right. So when I was putting this together, I was talking about having memes from 80s movies. This is actually a meme from the 70s. I realized that when I was doing a dry run on Friday that the movie is older than most of my audience, and then my deputy told me that the movie is actually older than her. So that didn't do much for my morale, but it was too late to change it. So you still get Ellen Ripley. Let's talk about priorities. All right, every preparedness conversation starts with motivation. Why do we want to be prepared? Why do we want to invest time and money and effort and stress in getting ready for low probability events that we may never actually have to deal with? Why are you all here today, other than, an hour inside rather than an hour outside? What motivated you to come? Drew.
Because I feel like in a pandemic, it's already kind of like a disaster emergency. And like not saying another one's gonna happen, but like if it were to or if this continues, I want to know how to be better prepared.
Absolutely, and I'm not sure why you're concerned about another disaster happening, because it's not like we've already had a derecho in the middle of a pandemic or anything, right? But yeah. Okay, sorry. Cat's transcribing Drew. Why else? Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, imaginary internet notoriety. Awesome, that'll work too. Thank you for the honesty. I hope I don't disappoint you too much. Kat, do we have any motivations from folks in the chat yet?
Not yet.
That's okay, I'll give them a sec to catch up. Okay, so quick show of hands and responses in chat from those. Who wants to rely on the government to take care of them in an emergency? And not a hand in the room went up. Yeah. There you go, there's your motivation right there, right? We're motivated to be prepared because we want to be self-sufficient, right? We don't want to place all of our faith in systems and institutions that we don't trust, that have proven unreliable, or that don't have the resources to do everything for everyone right now. That pretty much describes the government in all particulars for most of us at this point. We're motivated to be prepared because knowing how to handle adverse situations and knowing that we personally can handle adverse situations is empowering. And we're motivated to be prepared because disasters are low probability, but they're high consequence. In other words, they may not happen often, but when they do happen, that may be the worst day of our lives. And we are motivated to be prepared because we need to be capable of taking care of ourselves if we want to help others in an emergency or disaster. For both paid professional responders and volunteer responders, one of the guiding principles of any emergency response is me, us, them. Take care of myself first so I am capable of functioning in the emergency, then take care of the us, my household, my family unit, my team of responders. Once we are capable of functioning together, then we can go out and help others, right? Anybody who's flown commercial in their lives and has actually paid attention to the flight attendant's briefing at the beginning of the flight has seen this diagram or one very similar to it, right? We put the oxygen mask on ourselves first so we don't become incapacitated before we take care of our seatmate, right? If we become victims, we can't help anyone else. And most of the folks joining us here today are honors students. That means you're not just here to figure out who you want to be when you grow up or who you are now or to get an expensive piece of paper or because you're hoping that someday we'll bring back Visha, right? You're here to become leaders. As leaders, you need to be able to lead in times of crisis, in times of emergency, not just on blue sky days when everything is going well. That means being prepared to function in an emergency on a personal level so you can help the group that you lead function on an organizational level. So we've got some motivation to be prepared. The next step is mindset. We need to think about bad things and we need to talk about bad things so we're mentally prepared to deal with them when they confront us. Who can tell me what's going on here? I know you've all seen this meme. This is ancient at this point. Anybody? What's happening in this picture? Yeah.
The house is burning down.
Yeah, everything's cool. This is fine. This is denial, right? Before you can take effective action in an emergency, you need to be able to recognize that emergency for what it is. That means you need to break your normalcy bias. Now, I'm sure somewhere on either in the room or on WebEx, we've got a psych major who's going to tell me I got it wrong, but I promise I did run this past a psych professor at one point. When normalcy bias is our belief that things will always happen the way they normally happen. Everything will function the way it functions normally. So when something dangerous and abnormal does happen, our first response is to rationalize it away. That wasn't gunfire, that was fireworks, that was somebody shooting a movie, somebody dropped a huge stack of books really loud in the library. That rationalization, that refusal to recognize the situation for what it truly is, delays our response, and that delay can get us injured or killed. The other contributing factor goes back to evolutionary biology. Way back in our distant past, when somebody in our group started acting strangely, that was generally an indication that there was something medically wrong with them. And the instinctive reaction was to move away from them, to ostracize them in case that was contagious. We still see that today. We know that today, and our reactions in social situations are controlled by those instincts, right? There is a social pressure to not overreact to anything. There is a social pressure to not be the first person to respond to a new and unexpected stimulus. We don't want to look stupid in front of our friends and our peers and our instructors, so we avoid taking any action at all, right? We've seen that in fire drills. We've seen that when the fire alarm goes off in class. Everyone looks around sort of awkwardly, and no one wants to be the first person to actually stand up and start moving toward the exit. For those of you who can't see off camera, I tried to move toward the exit, and Drew intercepted me. So I tried, right? But the principle remains, right? Nobody wants to act out. So how do we get past that? Wild, violent overreaction is not how we get past it. But what we do instead of burning down the entire place is we think ahead. But why do we want to think about bad, scary things? How does thinking about bad, scary things and scaring ourselves help? What benefit does that give us once we get past getting scared? Yeah.
Helps us come up with potential responses if bad, scary thing does happen.
Nailed it. Yeah. When we think about what could happen and how we would respond to it if it did happen, we're planning. Planning is the art of making decisions in advance. And for emergency preparedness, it's also mental rehearsal. Remember back here, I was talking about normalcy bias and how we go into denial or we freeze when we're confronted with an abnormal situation. Well, thinking through emergencies helps us prepare to overcome that. It primes us to overcome that. You know, there's a lot of difference between, okay, this is bad, but I've thought about it once or twice and I think I know what to do next, versus, I've never thought about this before, what do I do? Right? So a minute ago, I said planning is the art of making decisions in advance. In emergency preparedness, we write the plan when we have the luxury of time. We have time to consider what might happen. We have time to do our research and figure out what the best response is going to be to those occurrences. So we've made those decisions without the stress or the time pressure and without an immediate threat trying to eat our skulls. When the emergency happens, we already have a pretty good idea of what we're going to do, so we just have to execute on that. Of course, we can't execute on a plan if we don't know we need to take action because we're not aware of the threat. So let's talk about awareness. We care about awareness because we can't react to a danger that we don't know about. So we cultivate awareness primarily from a preparedness perspective to notice events first. What we see in disaster literature again and again is that the people who notice a problem developing early have additional time to think about it. Even if they don't have a plan, they have an additional few seconds or few minutes to make a hasty plan. That puts them ahead of the curve versus everybody else who's not aware of the problem, right? Those people are the first ones to act. They're the first ones to react. They're the first ones to respond to the incident. They're the first ones to evacuate or take shelter, and they're the ones most likely to live if it's bad enough. What do we do every day that absolutely destroys our awareness of our surroundings? Everyone in this room does it. I know you do. I see cell phones coming out of pockets, right? Absolutely, right? Who's seen this happen with Cyride? Yeah, all the time, right? Pay attention, right? Be mindful. In addition to not getting flattened by 13 tons of Cyride, hi, if I've got any Cyride drivers on WebEx here, I know you're out there, guys. In addition to not getting flattened by 13 tons of bus, getting out of your phone and keeping your head up when you're walking around means you see some really cool stuff. A couple of months ago, I was wandering across campus because they made the mistake of letting me escape the Emergency Operations Center. And right in front of Durham, there was a light pole with a hawk on top of it eating a dove. Okay, kind of gross, but cool because, you know, urban hawks are cool. At least I think so. So I'm standing there watching this hawk, And I see 3 or 4 people walk directly under this meal in progress with this raptor 5 feet over their heads. They're all head down on their phones. That was a really cool thing they never got to see. So above and beyond the preparedness and survival benefits, you see more cool stuff, even if it means you're just going to post it on Instagram. Okay, back to planning. A good plan doesn't just go in one direction. It's not a railroad. It's not point A to point B with no branches. We have to assume that the emergency will never go as planned. Like in the middle of our pandemic response, which we're handling sort of well, we may suddenly get an unexpected derecho. Yeah. So as we go through the what if process of planning, we do a lot of what next. And a big part of that is what if plan A fails? If my primary action isn't going to handle it because the emergency has gotten ahead of the primary action, what's my secondary? What's my contingency? What are my 3rd and 4th level options if plan A isn't going to work for me? So when we plan for an emergency, we're looking for failure points, right? We'll communicate by cell phone, which is great. Cell phones are awesome as long as the battery holds out and as long as the towers stay online, right? We'll meet outside the lobby unless the lobby is where the fire is when we have to evacuate. So a plan is a starting point for improvisation. No plan is ever going to cover all possible contingencies. We could not have planned for a derecho in the middle of fall move-in. But if we've planned well, if we've done our thinking in advance and done a little bit of what if, it puts us at an advantage. It gives us a point to start improvising rather than having to start completely from scratch. There's also a leadership lesson here. In a lot of emergencies, there's no obvious authority figure around, right? First responders take time to get there unless you are lucky enough to have your emergency directly in front of a fire station or a police station. So if there's no obvious authority figure, if there's not obviously somebody there who knows what they're doing and is attacking the problem, people who are unprepared will gravitate toward and follow the first person who acts like they have a plan, who acts like they're confident, who acts like they know what they're doing. Sometimes the most important thing you can do to save other people's lives in the middle of saving your own is to say, follow me. And Drew's still between me and the door. I tried again. Okay. We can't just pull a plan out of our butts, though. We have to know what we're planning for. So this is the point at which I need a scribe, somebody with good handwriting who's not afraid to stand in front of one of these dry erase boards for a little bit. This is where I get lazy and I crowdsource part of the presentation.
Sure. That's right. Good handwriting format.
I can do it.
Thank you very much. Just so you know, there are going to be a few more of these, and I'm not going to make the same person do it twice, so the rest of you have not escaped. Do you all want to turn the camera toward the board, or do you want to just transcribe in chat? Which would be easier? Okay, sweet. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to crowdsource this both from the room and from the WebEx, is we need a list of disasters that are likely to affect ISU or the central Iowa area, because we need to know what we're preparing for before we start preparing. So other than pandemic, I'll give you that one for free, because I sure as hell don't want it anymore. What else are we likely to see? Yeah. Tornado, absolutely. Consistently one of our top hazards every time we do an analysis every year. Yep.
Major flooding event.
Flooding, also huge. Anybody paying attention to my very first slide? Yeah, the aerial view of Jack Trice Island in 2010. Yeah. What else might hit us?
Heat wave.
Heat wave, yeah, heat wave and drought. I saw one in the chat there. Kat, you want to give us that one?
Christopher said fires.
That too.
John Haskell is causing trouble again. It's not enough he causes trouble on Reddit. He has to follow me here too. Hey, John.
So we got neurotoxic agent attack.
Yep. So chemical biological attack. And for coup, we'll say civil unrest. That'll cover a broader spectrum than just the political takeover. Unless the provost is planning to depose President Winterstein, I don't know. We have anything else that came up in the chat? Okay, yeah. Yeah, foodborne illness, absolutely. That happens, I'll say a couple of universities a year get a case of that. There was, I'm trying to remember which one I read a case study on a while ago. There's a norovirus outbreak that took out 2 or 3 athletic teams. Not good for your season. Yeah. Yeah, made them sick for a while. Not permanently, I should specify. Thanks, Kat. Yeah.
Oh, I got large scale riot in the default of civil unrest.
Yeah, what's the difference between riots and VSHA? Right. That's why we don't have nice VSHAs anymore. Okay. All right, going once, going twice. Anything else you want to add to the board? I will not rule that out. After 2020, I'm not ruling that out. The meteor strike response would depend on how big it was and where it landed. Yeah.
What if a scientist thinks Jurassic Park was a good idea and makes dinosaurs and releases them on campus?
I want tickets.
It's a valid question.
We will go with Hollywood Apocalypse. That'll cover dinosaurs, zombies, and meteors. Okay. All right, so thank you very much. All right. So we've got a list of things that we want to be prepared for that are likely to happen on ISU's campus. For comparison, here is the more or less official list. This is in our current emergency operations plan. Let me slide to the other side here so you can actually see the list. We do this hazard ranking every year or two for campus. We source this from a bunch of university leaders across the entire enterprise, operations folks, academic side, and research. And we risk rank them according to how likely they are to happen, how badly they will impact the university if they do, how much warning time we would have if they did happen, and how long their effects would persist. So, some of the first stuff that was thrown out here, flood and tornado, are consistently among our top 3 because we know we have floods. We've had historic floods. That's the reason, the 93 flood is the reason ISU has an emergency management program. We had them again in 2010 that were just as bad. Tornado, we've had at least 1 strike campus, a couple of near misses. We live in the Midwest. We know it'll happen sooner or later. IT failures, not aware of any that have really hit ISU that badly in recent memory. When I was at the University of Kentucky, right before I got there, the entire payroll system went down. Imagine how happy everyone was about that, especially our folks who were living paycheck to paycheck at that time. And we were looking at a week or 2 before that system came back up. There was a lot of scrambling there. After I got to UK, we had one where the system that handled class registration, among a bunch of other stuff, went down the day before ad dropped.
Oh.
Yeah, that was fun. So we're always keeping an eye on that, and we're always talking to Kristen Constant's organization at IT about preparedness for there. Fires. We have fires on campus every year. Right? We have lab fires. Occasionally, we'll get a fire in a res hall. Those are a lot more rare. Typically, what we see are the lab fires because people are doing things that are reactive. Sometimes they're a little too reactive. High wind. Last year, August 10th, enough said, moving on. Train accident. If you don't get up on the north side of campus all that much, it's not that immediate, but we've got Union Pacific's highest volume cargo line in the country running along the north side of campus. I am always looking at the hazmat placards on the cars that run through there, right? I want to know, okay, how much methyl ethyl death is in that tank car? Answer, a lot. Winter storm, all the time. You know, I came here from Kentucky. I don't have words to describe this. Okay, I'm learning words to describe it, but I'm not there yet.
And you didn't hear normal?
Yeah, I was told that last winter was a relatively mild winter, so apparently this is closer to what I can expect for the rest of my stay here.
Yeah.
Right, thanks. There goes my morale. Violent incidents, civil disturbance, active shooter incidents are not as common as the media wants, as the media makes them look, because they're big, they're scary, they're deliberate human action, as opposed to a lot of these other things, which are nature or failures, not technology or systems. But they do happen. We do need to be prepared for them. Civil disturbance, again, the difference between a VISHA and a riot is really one of scale and aggression. And we do, with the political climate we've got in this country, we do need to be prepared for civil disturbances. Again, not common, but we can't rule them out. Hazardous material incident, we have 1,300 labs on this campus. How many of those do you think have some form of material, of hazardous materials in some quantity, whether chemical, biological, or radioactive? Darn near all of them, right? So most of them small quantities. We're not likely to melt all of Carver. I don't think Carver has any labs. We're not likely to melt all of Gilman, but we can't rule out a smaller scale incident. Have had those. Airplane crashes, depending on the prevailing winds. Ames Airport departure or arrival path is right over Vet Med. I ran this for them as a scenario last year, right before COVID started. Small aircraft crashes on takeoff, goes into the large animal clinic. Large animal clinic's going to be offline for 3 years while you rebuild. What's your business recovery plan? That was a fun discussion. Structural collapse. We used to have 4 towers out where Wallace Wilson are now. When they took those 2 towers down, they brought in search and rescue teams from all over the state to do live search and rescue training on structure collapse because it was a big rubble pile. I'm sorry I missed that. That was before I got here. If we take down another building, we'll probably do that again. It'll be pretty cool. Human disease outbreak. I have a feeling when we do the revised hazard matrix this year, that one's going to be a little higher than it currently is on the list. Utility failure. We've had 2 power outages in the last 18 months, August 10th and July 20th or 28th of 19. Was anybody here for the one in the summer of 19? Yeah, that was a fun one. That wasn't as bad as the rate show, but we were sweating that for a little bit because of the events we had going on campus at the time. And earthquake. We put it on here because it's everywhere in the U.S. can have earthquakes. That's generally ranked fairly low. Iowa does not have any major fault lines. And then major vehicle accident. It would be rare for us to be heavily affected by that, but that might take out critical personnel. It might also disrupt transportation out on I-35. 3 years ago, during a winter storm, there was a multi-vehicle accident that had the interstate shut down for quite some time. So this is the analysis that we go through on these. I talked longer about this slide than I wanted to. I can ramble indefinitely if given the opportunity. So I'll keep moving. So we have a huge list of catastrophes in front of us. Planning for all of those things can get a little bit overwhelming, especially if we try to write an individual plan for each bad thing. So instead, we try to look at what their common effects are. What can 2 or more of these do to us that are all going to be similar? Rather than planning for a tornado, rather than planning for a flood, rather than planning for a blizzard, we look at those and say, what might they all have in common? One big one for all of those is potentially power outages. So I need another scribe because now we're going to crowdsource the list of effects that we want to be prepared for. Excellent, thank you. All right, going back to the board. So I'll get you started. Power outage is going to be a big one. What other effects are we looking at coming out of those? Yep. We might have homes or residence halls that can't be occupied, right? So we'd have loss of housing. We would all, depending if we lose classroom buildings, you all have seen the swirl that has gone on with rescheduling classrooms for lower occupancy this semester and fall semester. Imagine what would happen again if we melted down Gilman, all those facilities were unavailable. How many classes are in Gilman right now that we would have to find alternate space for? So the infrastructure loss can cover a broad spectrum of stuff that we might have to be ready for. What else can happen out of those? Yeah?
In the chat, we've got injuries.
Yeah. Mass casualty, potentially mass fatality as well.
We've got transportation disruption.
Absolutely.
Would that be?
Yep. Yeah.
Something happens to a dining center, we might not have food for students.
Yeah. So loss of food supply, also loss of water. I can say this now because Ames released their after action on the derecho. When the entire city lost power, the wells that provide Ames water supply, or the pumps for those wells were running on battery power. We had between 20 and 60 minutes of battery power left before the entire city started losing water pressure and went into a boil water advisory before the power came back that night.
Wow.
So that one, we were looking at it going, how many students do we already have in the res halls and what are their bottled water needs? Because we were looking at, we were trying to figure out if we had to supply everybody who's currently moved in, what would the logistics footprint for that look like? So didn't need to that time, fortunately. And Ames is doing some fairly extensive mitigation to ensure that doesn't happen again. They're buying some generators for the well field, as well as some other backup power for other critical stuff in the city. See another one in the chat, sanitary access, absolutely. That definitely goes hand in hand with the water. If we lose water purification, or if we lose the sewers, or if the sewers flood, all of those are issues. Remember that flood water in the very first slide, that aerial view of flooded out Jack Trice? Who wants to go swimming in that? Who knows what's in that? I don't. Yeah.
Communication disruptions.
Oh, absolutely. So most cell towers do have generator power. However, that only lasts as long as they've got fuel. If you can't get to the towers to refuel them, or if the fuel it has to go somewhere else first, I'd say 24 to 48 hours of endurance on those towers before they start going down. I was in Kentucky for the 2003 ice storm. My apartment was out of power for 11 days. We had the far western part of the state in the 2009 ice storm. They were so completely out of communications between loss of power and loss of transmission lines or data lines. They literally had to send the Air National Guard's comms teams in with satellite communication gear because nobody in the capital had heard from entire counties in a week. This was in 2009 again. So yeah, comms loss can be catastrophic both on an individual and on a jurisdictional level. So we've got an idea of stuff that we want to prepare for. Do we have anything else in chat?
Christopher Sweet says, as to fuel, heat, as in the winter, HVAC.
Absolutely. Yeah. What would it be like if we lost heating capacity on campus tonight?
We wouldn't be able to have fun.
Yeah. Okay. So Drew, you can escape the board now. Thank you. So we've got a pretty solid list of effects that we want to be prepared for now. Awesome. Okay. Now we have a better understanding of what we're preparing for. All right. We've identified the things that are likely to happen. We know what they're likely to do to us. Now we understand the problem, so we can begin planning for it. When we make a plan, we need to define three things: the actions we're going to take, what we're going to do about the problem, the skills we're going to need to take those actions, how we're going to deal with the problem, and the tools and supplies that we'll need to make maximum use of our skills, what we'll use to do it. Let's dig into the actions first, right? For the threats and effects we've already discussed, what do we want to do when confronted with these problems? I'm not going to make anybody scribe. We'll just run this as a free-form discussion because I do want to get through the whole presentation. But what do we want to do about these things? Yeah, psychological preparation is a huge one. Take a breath, take a knee, drink some water, check on your neighbor. Do what you need to do to get to focus yourself. Don't panic. Awesome. Once we have not panicked, what's next?
Evaluate your surroundings.
Yeah. Know what you've got, know what you have, know what resources you have, know what your immediate threats are. Evaluate what's around you. Kat?
Kind of the same thing, but find alternate methods and.
Yep. So our immediate needs are going to go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, I know we're probably going to have a social scientist who wants to undermine Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know there's a lot of criticism out there about it, but it is a convenient model for this for now. So for the sake of discussion, we'll use it. We're replacing the stuff that we've lost. What are our critical needs that we're going to have to address first? Out of these effects and out of anything else we've talked about so far.
Oxygen.
Yep. What's the rule? 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, right? So we want to be sure we're in an environment that isn't immediately going to kill us. That may mean we have to relocate ourselves. That's what we call evacuation, right? Whether it's a fire drill or leaving town because an entire tanker of methyl death is leaking off the Union Pacific line, we go somewhere where the threat isn't. So secure our environment. If that means getting a new environment, that's what we do. We replace those immediate needs. So we replace our shelter. If we have to evacuate, if our home isn't usable, we need to find someplace else we can stay. We replace our sources of food and water. That may mean improvising. That may mean breaking that case of MREs out from under the basement stairs. Right. What else do we want to accomplish? Yeah. Yep. So stuff. So we've got a list of tasks we want to accomplish. Relocate, taking care of our essentials for survival, and then past that, we want to start restoring the things that aren't essential for survival, but help us and our neighbors communicate, collaborate, and coordinate to make the situation better. Okay. My boss asked me to put this slide in here, so this is a random presentation of the evacuation map for the first floor of JISC. We talked a moment ago about getting away from where the threat is. So if we have to evacuate this building because suddenly this building is on fire because I stepped on the power cable here, what's our evacuation route? How do we get out of here? Yep, out these doors, and where from there? Pretend this is a much larger building that I've never been in before. You need to explain it to me. I'm dying in a fire. Please tell me where to go. Perfect. So Drew just gave me 2 exits from the room. These doors are these doors, and gave me 2 exits from the building. There or there. So I've got options already. Drew's got a branching plan right there. That's a really short evacuation plan, but that's all we need for this case. So as you are wandering around campus, my boss would like you to pay attention to the evacuation maps that Environmental Health and Safety has conveniently posted for your survival in every room in every building on campus. We've got these all over the place. They also show you where the fire extinguishers are when you start your next lab fire. And if we have an automated external defibrillator, we also show you where the AEDs are in buildings if somebody goes down with a heart attack because you started a lab fire. The lesson here should be don't start lab fires. But, okay, so we have some ideas about what we want to do. What skills do we want in our toolbox to take care of those things? What do we need to know how to do to take care of ourselves and others in emergencies and disasters? Again, not going to go to the whiteboard, but discussion.
You'd be able to respond calmly in a time of discussion?
Yep, the psychological preparation and looking and acting calm so nobody else takes the cue from you and freaks out. Yep. It's okay. I'll stop paying attention to the chat. It's like I keep seeing pop-ups. I'm distracted.
I know.
It might be another update. It might give me a dopamine hit. Yeah.
I guess the survival situation doesn't have skills like to allow you to survive, like find food or know what food is,
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, know where to get resources, both in a wilderness situation and in an urban environment. If we went full zombie apocalypse, where would you raid on campus for food?
Riley.
the dining room is full. Like, where is the secret campus bakery at? I know that.
Oh, that's
I
around
go to
towers.
basement.
There's a deeper than Riley.
I'll tell you, there's probably not a faculty member on this campus who doesn't have a food stash in their desk, right? Start getting into faculty offices. That's where you find the good treats. Okay, so knowing where to find resources, knowing your environment, which means back a few slides, paying attention to your environment, looking around and seeing what is where in the buildings, and maybe going and exploring a few buildings that you don't have classes in, right? Knowing what's where. Medical skills, huge universal one, right? What else might you want to know how to do if you have a small lab fire? How to extinguish a fire? Yes. Usually, when there's not a pandemic, every September, our fire safety group will do fire extinguisher training and demos in the Agora right in front of the library. That will probably happen this fall if we can make it happen. So 5 minutes of your time, you get to put out a live fire. It's fun. What other skill sets might we want?
Start a fire.
Yeah. How to start a fire if we need to get warm or if we need to cook. Don't actually practice that in your dorm room. Thank you. What are other, yeah. Yep. Yeah, first aid. What goes hand in hand with first aid? What does the Red Cross usually teach side by side with that? CPR. Yeah. Anybody have their CPR certification current? Okay. Anybody more or less remember how to do it if you've taken the class before? About half the hands, actually about 2/3 of the hands in the room going up. That's awesome. Did you all do that as an honors program previously, as an event?
It
Okay.
should be one. It's required for most majors, isn't it?
Really?
What? It's required for mine. I thought it was, okay.
When I was in high school, all the juniors had to get CPR certified.
We watched a video of CPR in the office and had it.
Yeah, and as far as our AED program, we have about 160, 170 AEDs across campus now. Since they rolled that program out, we've had 6 or 7 saves. So people do go down with heart attacks on this campus. They do come back alive after that happens, if you've got the skills and the tools necessary to solve the problem. Okay. All right, so enough about skills, let's talk about stuff. By the way, this is not my basement. Let's get that out of the way right now, because every time I do this presentation, someone asks if that's my stash. No, mine is better organized. Now, if you go on prepper forums or the prepper subreddits, a lot of the discussion is going to be around what to buy. And I leave this for later in the presentation, after we've talked about mindset, after we've talked about skills, because you can have a closet full of canned food and rifle ammo, and it's not going to do you any good if you don't have the right mindset and skills to make use of it, right? Now, having said that, I do have some general philosophical points on how to set up your preps. I'm going to go through those next. All right. First principle I want to talk about is mission drives equipment, otherwise known as using the right tool for the job. Earlier, we talked about likely hazards and their effects, which means we already have a pretty good framework for that. We talked about the actions we want to take, so we understand what we want to be able to do. First aid was something that came up a couple of times in our skills discussion just now, which means we probably want the supplies necessary to treat injuries, treat for shock, and keep people stabilized until we can get them to a higher level of care. So bandages, splinting material, tourniquets, if you're preparing to deal with severe bleeding, things like that. A lot of these, we have power outages, the very first thing that happened there. What's one of the biggest problems we have in a power outage? 50% of the time, on average, it's dark. So I'm not going to hit the lights here because I may not be able to get them back on, judging from the way they were flickering earlier. But we want to be able to see in the dark. So having a light source is probably something we want to put on the list of preps. All right? Figure out what you want to be able to do, what capabilities you want to have, research the tools for those jobs, and then learn how to use those tools. All right? Because the second principle of gearing up is to stick with things that are familiar or things you can easily learn how to use. I'm losing my notes there. And things that you can maintain proficiency in using. You don't want to read the instructions on the generator after the power has already gone out, right? Learn from my example. In the 2009 ice storm back in Kentucky, I bought a kerosene heater. I hadn't taken it out of the box yet. So we get a heads up from the National Weather Service. We've got an ice storm coming. I run out, I get a couple of gallons of kerosene, I pick up some other supplies, bread, milk, eggs, so we can make disaster French toast. You know how this goes. So then the power drops. So there I am, 9 o'clock at night, standing in my kitchen. I've got a headlamp strapped to my face, so I have the cyclopean beam of light coming out of my forehead, trying to unbox, set up, fuel, and safely start a kerosene heater I've never used before, while I've got 3 cats circling around me who are cranky, cold, and hungry. All right? Don't do that. Unbox your stuff and learn how to use it on a blue sky day when you have the luxury of making mistakes and you can fumble your way through the instruction manual. Right? And this touches on the concept of everyday carrier, having a few basic items with you all the time. What I'm going to do now is go through my everyday carry to give you some ideas on what you may want to have on you. Get my lost speaker notes there. So first off, I already said I've got a light source because I hate stumbling around in the dark. My night vision is not that great to begin with. So I use this pretty much every day, even if it's to find things in the dark shadows under my desk. I also have on my keychain a second light source because when the batteries for this die, and they always die at the worst possible time, I assure you, I don't want to be changing the batteries for this thing in the dark. With this, at least I can find where my spare batteries are. Always carry cash. I know it's very retro. I know this is 2021. I know electronic banking is the way of the 1990s, and I should get on board with it. But when all the credit card readers are down, cash still works. Also, there may be some stuff I just don't want to leave an electronic transaction record for. What that is, I'll leave to your imaginations. No, kidding, mostly. Always have a water bottle with me, not just because my throat tends to go at about the 30-minute mark when I'm speaking, but also because staying hydrated in a disaster is important. Staying hydrated is important all the time, but this is one of those things where if you're functioning at 80%, 90% of your normal level, you're a lot better able to manage a disaster than if you're functioning at about 50 to 60%. I tend to go through a fair amount of water to stay hydrated and stay functional. If I'm dehydrated, I get stupid and cranky. So that's always with me. Also, in a really bad situation, if we have an active shooter or somebody comes, or an active stabber or an active chainsaw, this is an improvised impact weapon. It's not great, but it's better than nothing. It's better than hiding under a desk. I usually do have a pocket knife. ISU PD knows I have this. This is legal length. Because I need to get into things. There's usually at least once a day, I will cut an apple or an envelope or something. And a knife is a basic tool to handle a lot of emergency preparedness stuff, whether that is cutting a strip off of clothing so you can use that to improvise a tourniquet, whether that is unraveling something so that you can use that string to build improvised shelter. A knife is pretty critical. And also, I grew up having one on me. If I don't have one clipped to my pants, I feel like there's something fairly important missing. IDs, 2 credit cards in case one gets compromised. So I learned that lesson long ago when I was on the road. I had 1 credit card with me. My bank hadn't notified me they turned it off. I tried to buy gas. Fortunately, I also had cash. But redundancy helps. In my bag, I've got a few more things. This is generally my go-to. This travels with me all the time. I carry a boo-boo kit for minor injuries, scrapes, skin, knuckles, minor cuts, things like that. I also have a bunch of over-the-counter meds in here because, y'all, I am allergic to everything. There are no seasonal allergies. It's 12 months of freaking year for me. So I always have Claritin. Again, just that functioning at 80 to 90% is better than functioning at 50 to 60%. I keep this in a separate pullout so I can reach into my bag, figure out and grab it without having to think too much about where I have it hidden. Right now, spare masks. Hopefully I can get rid of these someday. I'm really looking forward to that. In here, I keep a couple of writing utensils. Always have a Sharpie, always have some index cards, whether that's making notes on what I need to do next or leaving a message for somebody to let them know where I've gone. Sharpie is good for that. It's permanent. Sharpie is also good for first aid use because it tends not to come off when wet with blood or bodily fluids. Not to get too far into a first aid lesson here, that's a lot better than ballpoint pen. Next pocket in my bag, I tend to carry another pullout. That way, if one of the energy bars I have in here loses containment, it's not going to smear half-melted chocolate all over the inside of my bag. It'll just smear half-melted chocolate all over the inside of this. I always have a few energy bars with me. Back to the principle of maintaining function. If I'm behind a 3-mile backup on the interstate, or if I'm out working a scene that I got called to on campus, or if I'm just stuck somewhere and start getting hungry and stupid, this is a temporary fix for that. When I get hungry, I get stupid and irritable. I know this happens. This is a countermeasure for that. Also, everything I have in here individually wrapped so I can hand it off to somebody else if they need it. In my electronics pocket, I've got a few different things here. I have cables and charger adapters for all of my personal electronics. Also carry a backup battery so I can charge my stuff on the go. I used to forego this, and then there was Pokemon Go. And then all of a sudden, a charge that lasted all day lasted about 2.5 hours. I tell you that you find motivation in some of the most unexpected places. Also, separately from the boo-boo kit, I carry a trauma kit. This is eye searing screaming orange. Remember, I used to work for University of Kentucky Police Department. I'm also not politically safe to admit this, but I am a recreational shooter. I spend a fair amount of time around guns, both personally and professionally. If you've got the ability to make holes, you need the ability to plug holes. So I've got a tourniquet, a set of chest seals, some trauma gauze, some other supplies in here for dealing with that kind of thing, along with a set of trauma shears if I need to cut away clothing to expose an injury so I can treat it. Have some other stuff in there, not going to dig into right now, but the point of going through all of that is that I've got some decent supplies here. I have another list of stuff that goes with me if I'm traveling, and I handle most of this stuff every day. I'm familiar with it. I know how to use all of it. I know what it does. I know what its limitations are, and I know where it is in that bag. So if I need to say, hey, Kat, Drew tried to stop me getting out of the room, and there was a horrible chainsaw accident, and now he's bleeding. I need you to go to my bag and get the orange pouch out of it so we can stop the bleeding. I'm familiar enough with this stuff, I can describe it to somebody else if I need them to get their hands on it instead. So also, because I'm familiar with it, I'm likely to remember that I actually have it. If you buy stuff and stick it in a closet and never touch it again, you're going to go through the emergency and go, hey, I should buy a kerosene heater. You go out, you buy a kerosene heater, you come home, you open your closet to put the kerosene heater in, and you put it on top of the kerosene heater you bought 5 years ago. Don't do that. Okay, this brings us to my last point about gear, which is to have it where you're likely to need it. How am I on time here? 3 minutes, I got to go fast. Where do most of us spend the majority of our time? At home, right? After that, work or school. And going between those two, in the car or on site ride. So based on that, where do you think you might want to have emergency stuff, emergency kits stashed? I'm sorry? Yep. Yeah. If you have a bag that you carry with you every day, stash your stuff in there. But generally, you're going to want a home kit if you have an office or a fixed work location. Have an office kit if you don't have a bag that travels with you. And especially in the winter, especially if you get out of town for any length of time, have a car kit, have a vehicle kit. So based on that, again, running short on time, so I'm not going to do the next exercise, but we've talked about what we want to be able to accomplish. We talked about the skill sets we want to have. You can probably dig into this and figure out what you want in each of those kits. There are a lot of really good resources out there. My usual go-to is ready.gov. That's the Federal Emergency Management Agency site. They have fairly extensive lists on things to consider getting a hold of. All right, last topic, financial and legal preparedness. All right, because let's be honest, disasters are interesting. We like talking about disasters. They make good movies. We're all a lot more likely to succumb to heart disease, cancer, and traffic accidents than disasters. And emergencies are expensive, right? You don't have a no-cost emergency. I've never seen one. The same principles we talked about earlier apply to our financial health. Have a plan, have reserves you can draw on in an emergency. Now, I'm not going to go all Dave Ramsey here, and I know most of my audience is college students, and I remember what it was like to subsist mainly on ramen and the dining halls. And I know, once you get out of college, you can have mortgages and car payments and probably daycare for some of you. But good insurance and an emergency fund are tools for solving a lot of little problems so you can concentrate on the bigger problems. Learn some personal finance skills. That should be on the preparedness skills list. And as you are able, put those into practice. Specifically for students, for those of you who are living off campus, look into renter's insurance. If you are on speaking terms with your parents, and I don't want to assume because there were times when I wasn't, see about what it takes to get you put on their homeowner's policy with a renter's insurance addition. It's fairly cheap. If your apartment burns down, your stuff is not covered by the apartment owner's policy. Renter's insurance kicks in and covers you for those losses. Also, fairly dark here, but most universities do lose a few students every academic year. All right, having a term life insurance policy as a student costs about as much as one latte a month at the hub. If something happens to you, that'll relieve your parents of the financial burden around dealing with the cost of your death, your funeral, whatever else they may have to work on. Words are hard. It's after 5 now. So, right, the legal stuff is the unglamorous part of preparedness. It's not fun to talk about. It's not all that interesting unless you're majoring in something like actuarial science. But it's how you take care of your dependents and your family, right? Have a will. Have a life insurance policy. If you have strong beliefs about medical treatment, get those written down in a living will. Designate someone with medical power of attorney who can make medical decisions for you if you're incapacitated, right? Decide whether you want your organs donated or you want your body donated to a medical school or you want to be cryogenically preserved as a head in a jar, right? If there's any unresolved business you've got, write those letters, right? We all have a limited number of heartbeats allocated to us. We don't know what that number is. We don't know when that number is going to be up. And on that point, emergencies and disasters are physically and psychologically demanding. Take care of your health, right? Take care of yourself. If you're running at 110% on a normal day, going to class, going to work, going to club meetings, going out partying, please not right now. If you're running at 110% on a normal day, you don't have any reserve capacity to draw on when a situation demands more of you. Now, I'm not saying we all have to be able to pass the fire department's hiring physical. I sure can't at this point. Not that I ever could have. But to the extent that you can, be in good physical shape, be in good mental shape. Those things will make you more resilient. Self-care is emergency preparedness. Okay, that concludes my prepared material. We are only 2 minutes over. I'm amazed that I managed to get through it that quickly. Please ask me questions. Yeah.
Do you think the fact that Gilman Hall is a maze map is a safety hazard?
I'd have to go take a look at Gilman. I don't spend a lot of time in there. It probably is a safety hazard. How are we fixed on signs pointing to the exits? Because that's how we deal with that, right? Is the maps that I showed you a bit ago and signage showing clearly how to get out. we can take a look at that. Let me actually make a note, and I will hand that off to our fire safety guys and see when their next review of that building is going to be.
There was just a meme on Reddit today about filming Halloween.
Saw it. Good question. So I was a Boy Scout, insert stereotype here, but a big part of what my Scout troop did was the emergency preparedness stuff. So as a teenager, I had my first exposure to it. And I grew up at the tail end of the Cold War when we thought there was still a possibility of full-on nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So I grew up in a household that always had a little bit of preparedness mindset. So I was sort of primed for it, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't know about it as a profession. And then in fall of '07, I did a class called Community Emergency Response Team that Fayette County Lexington Emergency Management put on. It's a federal standard curriculum implemented locally. It is 8 or 9 weeks, 1 night a week, and you learn how to be your own first responder. So we went through team organization, a little bit of personal preparedness, like I talked about now, fire suppression, search and rescue, disaster medical operations, terrorism, hazardous materials, weapons of mass destruction awareness. And after that was over, I said, this is really cool. What else does your office do? So they made the mistake of feeding me and encouraging me. And after a few years of volunteering for them was when I decided I wanted to do emergency management full time. So I went back to school. But I think my motivation for personal preparedness has always been a vague mistrust of authority figures and the desire to be able to take care of myself because I couldn't be sure that anybody else was coming to save me. Now, I realize that as something that resembles an authority figure in dim light, I probably shouldn't say that, but that's how I got here. Yeah.
Are there currently opportunities for students to get involved with emergency management at IOC?
Not currently. I would really like to have an emergency management intern program in my group. Right now, we are a staff of 2, me and my deputy. The question is, what would that look like in terms of educational opportunities and what work would we give an intern? So that is an ongoing conversation that I periodically have with my director. Stay tuned. Yeah.
So are you on call like all the time in case there's an emergency on campus?
Pretty much. One of the other things I actually have in my bag is my radio in case I need comms with Ames PD, ISU PD, Ames Fire. We have a rotation schedule, so technically it's not 24/7, 365 for me. In practice, if it's big enough or interesting enough, I'll probably want to hear about it. It's been, I'm not going to use the Q word. It's 5 letters. It jinxes me if I use it. But my last few months of on-call rotations, I didn't have a lot of calls. And then this past week, I got 2. We had a lab accident over in Hoover, no injuries, fairly minor. And then we had a power outage in one of our more critical buildings. So do get calls for minor stuff that could escalate. Do we have any questions in the chat? I saw at least one pop up. Okay. Sorry, I said I was going to ignore the chat and then I completely failed to do that. Yep. I mean, we said 4 to 5. If people want to talk about other stuff, I'll be glad to stay as long as you want me to. But if you've got pressing appointments, I'm not going to be hurt if you want to bail. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm interested in seeing like, kind of like, what you did when like you first heard about the pandemic and like the process over this past year of what you've done, how you've reacted and stuff. Like a timeline.
Oh, geez. How do I sum up a year of pandemic? Did you see my year 1 post a couple of weeks ago? Okay, so risk management and study abroad were, I think, among the first groups on campus to really start looking at NCOV-19 back when that was the dominant term for it. It got on their radar December and maybe even November of 19 when it first started emerging in Wuhan province, because we did have a few students, I think 1 or 2 faculty members in Wuhan at the time. So they started coordinating with Aaron Baldwin's unit at Health Services fairly early on. We heard about it, looked at it, said, okay, this could be an emerging problem. It's not big enough for us to engage on yet. We don't know enough about it. Late January of 20, things were starting to escalate over there. We had advised those people affiliated with the university who were in Wuhan to go ahead and get flights home because it was accelerating over there. January 27th was officially COVID day 1 for ISU. That was when we had a work session with emergency management, risk management, health services, ISU PD, and a couple of other groups on campus that we knew were going to be involved in a response to a major pandemic. Got together, said, okay, who's in charge of this thing? Who owns what responsibilities, broadly speaking? And then Aaron and Chief Newton went off and briefed President Winterstein and her cabinet on what we had going. Fast forward about a month, we've been watching it build. We've been watching it build. We were having a lot of backstage discussions about what if. This was the planning stage where we still didn't know which way it was going to jump. So we were figuring out what our options were based on different scenarios. Things were starting to accelerate in Europe in late February. February 28th, we had a meeting, figured out, okay, these are our criteria. If any country is declared a level 3 alert by CDC, we're going to start pulling students and faculty out of there immediately. Figured out what our next steps would be if we had to do that. Went home about 5:30. Hour and a half later, we're back on campus because Italy went to level 3. And that was the point, I think, at which the entire campus community realized this is real. The next couple of weeks were pretty much constant planning, trying to stay one step ahead of this thing, figuring out what the next few weeks were going to look like. The week before spring break, I remember we announced that we were going to be sending everyone home for break, and we were going to have 2 weeks of online classes after break. You remember that? 2 weeks? How'd that work out for us? So, I mean, there were 2 points that stick out to me when I knew that this was no joke. The first one was the Thursday before spring break. I went for a walk on campus. I had to get out of the EOC for a while. Right, I'm headed back north. I've been down to the MU. I've seen the MU emptying out, and I'm walking past the front steps of Curtis, and there's a group of graduating seniors hanging out at the front steps, and they're saying their goodbyes. And I walked past right as one of them said, "This wasn't how my senior year was supposed to end." So there was that one's used on me, and it's like, we didn't want to do any of this to you. We really didn't. But we tried to make the best decisions we could with the information we had available to us at the time. The other thing that made me realize just how serious it was the week of spring break. The MU was still open, as in unlocked. But I walked into the MU, again, had to get out of the EOC, had to walk on campus to clear my head. So I came down here. I walked into the MU, and you know the TV screens that are all over the place with the list of what's happening in the MU today? The screen said, "What's happening in the MU today?" There was no list. So we sent everybody home. We put, I can't even remember what the number was. I think it was 6,500 class sessions for the spring 2020 semester that went fully online in the space of about 3 weeks there. Absolutely phenomenal lift by everybody on the academic side and everybody in IT itself. And see, April, May, this campus was desolate. I would drive in the mornings. I was reporting to the EOC about 7:30 every morning. So I'd come in, and it was zombie apocalypse town. You know, there were mornings, the only thing I saw moving on my entire commute was Cyride. If it weren't for Cyride, it would have been, I described it like this once in a Reddit post. like a level in a video game where nothing but the scenery had loaded. It was just that surreal, especially walking around campus when every building was locked. So it's like, this isn't a real building, it's just an outline of a building. April, May, June, started working on how do we bring employees back to campus. We knew we had to have a fall semester. We're trying to figure out what the fall semester looked like. Executive Committee on Fall Planning engaged early May on that problem. And then late July, early August, we're talking about how do we bring everybody back to campus safely. That was when we started talking about the mass testing effort that anybody who was living in the res halls last fall went through lead rec. I got tapped to lead that because there were a lot of people in health services who were more qualified than me to do it, but they all had to do health servicey stuff. So it's like, hey, let's pull Clayton. He's expendable. We can blame him for whatever goes wrong. That was intense. That was 2 weeks. I'd do it again if I had to. I really hope I don't have to. And I think you all were here for the rest of it. Everybody remembers 801 Day. Everybody remembers what happened after 801 Day. Everybody remembers trying to keep the campus from figuratively burning down over that. And we got through fall. Everything we did, I know there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there about decisions. I know we're never going to make everybody happy. At the end of the day, we had 0 cases of transmission traced to classroom contact. The stuff we're doing in the classrooms, the stuff we're doing in this room right now has worked. So what we're doing right now is just trying to keep things running more or less as they did in fall semester, hopefully a little less awful for you all. We are trying to figure out how we can safely bring back more stuff like this, more face-to-face contact. And we're looking ahead at what mass vaccination looks like. Right now, vaccine supplies are still limited. Went to healthcare, folks in long-term care facilities first. As of last week, rolling out to first responders, K through 12 educators, few other groups that are either critical infrastructure or vulnerable. I anticipate that the next phase, 1C, will probably address folks who are under 65, but have compromised immune systems or heightened vulnerability. After that, hopefully we'll get into general population late spring, early summer. I'm not going to make any promises about what that schedule is going to look like. That is so far out of my control, but it's coming. We will get there. Sorry, probably more information than you wanted.
No, it's fine.
This is cathartic for me. What else can I talk about? Or do you all just want to go get dinner?
You gotta get out of here at like 5:20.
Okay.
We have 4 more minutes.
All right, I'll take 2 more questions, or one if it's a long answer. Any questions from the chat? I see we've still got like
They're all still here, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've got a dozen people online.
Do y'all have any questions? Any questions online?
We'll give them a minute if they're slow typers. I apologize, this is probably a good time. My voice is starting to go.
Christopher Sweet is just enjoying hearing the story.
You know, theoretically, I could get a few professional responders and we could do an hour of just telling war stories. You'll know the difference between a war story and a fairy tale, right? A fairy tale begins once upon a time in a land far, far away. A war story begins, there we were.
I wouldn't mind hearing about the Jack Trice flooding.
That was before my time, but I worked with a bunch of people who were here for both the 93 and the 2010 floods. So that may be something we can put together. One of the things we had talked about doing, couldn't get the right people in the right place, the right time to do, was a history of disasters at ISU. Some of you may have seen me post this last summer. I have a copy of our 1963 nuclear war survival plan. Yeah, back when we had a fallout shelter under Friley, among other places. Yeah, Kat.
Great question to
and us, what will the next event in the series be?
Awesome question. The next event in this series, we have not announced the date yet, but Sean Jameson from Risk Management and I will be team presenting on personal emergency and disaster preparedness for travel. I'll do a half hour on general travel, road trips, wilderness excursions, how to take care of yourself safely in a hotel. And then Sean will do a half hour specific to international travel and some of the stuff he's seen coordinating safe international travel pre-COVID. So watch for that. Do you want me to talk about the third one? The third one also not scheduled yet. It'll be sometime after we do the second one. But I will run a tabletop exercise where everybody attending will take the roles of various ISU, Ames, and Story County authority figures, and we will play through a major disaster affecting campus. So you get to see if you are smarter than ISU's emergency manager. My prediction is yes, all of you are not as dumb as one of me. Thank you very much for logging in. Thank you very much for coming. I enjoyed getting to do this. See you all in a few weeks.
Thank you so much.
I'll let you guys sign us out here.